for those disproportionately impoverished on the basis of gender, and to assure that a gender perspective is mainstreamed in resource decisions of the world. Platform advances include increased global recognition of the gender dimensions of poverty, including increased acknowledgement of the feminization of poverty, and recognition that women's equitable access to resources is critical to the success of their children and families and the future of human flourishing. As an educator, mother, grandmother, as an elder, I celebrate the Beijing Platform for Action for its contributions these past 25 years to women's global solidarity and its partial progress toward realizing the human right of all genders to freedom from poverty.
Education and training of women. Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states, quote, "All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights," end quote. According to the Beijing Platform for Action, education is a human right and an essential tool for achieving the goals of equality, development, and peace. It is rightly said, if you educate a man, you educate an individual. But if you educate a woman, you educate a nation. Education is an integral part of every individual's life. But when girls are educated, countries become stronger and more prosperous. Research has shown that educating girls, in particular, has a multiplier effect. Educated girls are more likely to marry later and have fewer children, who in turn will be more likely to survive and be better nourished and educated. Educated women are more productive at home and better paid in the workplace and more able to participate in social, economic, and political decision-making. For these reasons, we should advocate for the education and uplift of all girls and women around the world.
Women in health. The Beijing Platform for Action on Women's Health called for the realization of women's right to the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. It emphasized that the gender, as well as other inequalities based on ethnicity, class, and geographic location, were important barriers for the achievement of women's health. As a women's health nurse practitioner, I've seen a negative impact over the last few decades of our increasingly for-profit US healthcare system on recognizing and lifting these barriers. The COVID-19 pandemic underscores society's reliance on women, both on the front line and at home, while simultaneously exposing structural inequalities across every sphere. Responding to the pandemic is not just about rectifying longstanding inequalities, but also about building a resilient world in the interest of everyone, with women at the center of recovery.
Violence against women and girls is a critical area of concern that profoundly limits, if not kills, the dreams and real achievement of equality, development, and peace. Violence against women and girls creates harmful, long-lasting impacts from the social control of gendered and other forms of violence. Ending and preventing violence matters because we deserve to live in freedom and mutually to develop our talents, contributions, love whom we wish, be healthy and able to care for ourselves, families, and communities, ultimately advancing our women's human rights. When women are equal members and interconnected in our relationships and the world, there is no limit to what can be achieved for humanity and the planet.
Women and armed conflict. In nearly every region in our world, women bear the brunt of armed conflict. In a world of continuing instability and violence, the implementation of cooperative
Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Moon Luna Vasquez. I am the co-chair of the Lesbian and Allies Project, a project of the U.S. Women in Cuba collaboration, and we work closely with WILFs, Cuba, and the Bolivarian Alliance Issues Committee. The U.S. Women in Cuba Collaboration's mission is to build a strong U.S. women's movement dedicated to ending the U.S. government blockade against Cuba and to creating mutually beneficial U.S.-Cuba relations. Our work advances the rights of all women in the context of universal women's rights. WILV's Cuba and the Bolivarian Issues Committee works by empowering and educating diverse U.S. women to normalize relations between the U.S. and the countries that comprise of the Bolivarian Alliance through education, advocacy, and travel. The Lesbian and Allies Project works to build alliances with Cuba's LGBTQIA2 spirit plus communities. We're committed to educating U.S. people regarding ways forward using the inspiration and example of Cuba's revolutionary work towards advancing all human rights. In 1995, over 40,000 women gathered in China to participate in the United Nations International Conference on Women to issue the Beijing Platform of Action. Today, as we celebrate the 30th anniversary of this historic moment that crafted this program of women's equality in the context of human rights, we acknowledge the 12 critical areas of focus as shown in the video in the beginning. What was missing from those areas are two important issues: climate change and the topic that we're going to discuss today, the rights of LGBTQI2S people, plus people. We thought it'd be important to hold this webinar for two reasons. Over the last 30 years, there has been many advancements that recognize that LGBTQI2S plus rights are a women's issue and a human right issue. Secondly, we want to highlight the advancements of LGBTQI2S plus rights in Cuba, the country that the Lesbian and Allies Project and the U.S. Women in Cuba Collaboration and WILV's Cuba and the Bolivarian Alliance Issue Committee focus on. It has been the task of the UN CSW's conversation circles, now the Rainbow Caucus, to organize us and to highlight the struggles of the LGBTQI2 spirit plus communities so that we see that this is one of the critical areas of the Beijing Platform for Action. We are honored to participate in that work and to highlight the work of our sisters in the FMC, the Federation of Cuban Women, and the NJC, the National Union of Cuban Jurists, in developing the Cuban's constitution, which bases the rights of LGBTQI2S plus people in the context of human rights and love. In Cuba, love is law. Why LGBTQI2S plus? Why the Cuban Families Code? Why CSW? and why the Beijing Platform for Action. Right now, we're supposed to have Yamila, the woman who is one of the people that helped write the Families Code. What we're going to do is switch the program a little bit, and I'm going to turn the program over to Deb Bolton, and she has 2 videos that she'll show. Deb, you're on. Thank you.
Thank you, Moon. So I'm a retired nurse practitioner, and I currently am on the advisory board for the U.S. Women in Cuba Collaboration, as well as the Lesbian and Allies Project and the WILF Cuba and Bolivarian Alliance Committee. I also serve on some local health-related committees where I live in Seattle, Washington. So Dr. Yamila González Ferrer hopefully is going to be joining us and discussing in more detail as an expert on somebody who was instrumental in helping to put together the Constitution, the Families Code of the Constitution in 2022. So just briefly, I'm not going to go into the detail, but at that time, what some of the LGBTQI rights that were granted were same-sex marriage, rights to anyone wanting to adopt or raise a child, and to non-commercial surrogate mothers, and for assisted reproduction. It protects trans rights, although for many years, Cuba has treated sex reassignment surgeries as a health issue, and that's been available. Unfortunately, with the embargo now, it's very difficult for getting whatever supplies and medications are needed to do those surgeries. And also the new law designates LGBT discrimination as illegal. So I look forward to hearing in much more detail from an expert, from Dr. Yamila González. So oh, and also in addition, I think Cubans should be very proud of the fact that the process that they use to implement this new families codes in 2022 was a process of participatory democracy, which is how they introduced and passed the referendum. I don't remember the number, but there were thousands of community meetings all across the country to discuss the issues before they made the final referendum. And I think it was about 2/3 of the country agreed to pass this referendum. So Cuba is definitely on the forefront of progressive human rights. So I recently had the privilege to visit Cuba once again, and it's really not easy to describe the mix of emotions while being there. Despite all the obstacles placed on Cubans due to the cruel blockade imposed by the US government against the Cuban people, the spirit of friendship, dedication, altruism still exists. And also, I love hearing all the best live music everywhere I go while I'm in Cuba. So I was able to conduct some interviews of Cuban women from the queer community to ask them about themselves and the community work they do, ask them if they think there's been any impact from the LGBTQI rights that began with the Families Code about 3 years ago, and what they think are some barriers to achieving full acceptance and equality for the LGBTQ plus community in Cuba, and what they and their organizations are doing to try to achieve that full equality for the queer community in Cuba. So I'd like to share with you 2 messages that I videotaped during my last visit this year in January and February. The first one is of Norm Norma Guillard. Norma is a social psychologist, educator, publisher, advisor, and trailblazer who describes herself as an Afrofeminist. She's been a driving force on issues of gender identity and anti-racial discrimination in Cuba for many national and international organizations. In addition, Norma coordinates a group of lesbian women called Remi in Havana. And she helped develop other similar lesbian organizations in other provinces with whom she still maintains advisory ties. So, and the U.S. Women in Cuba collaboration has had the privilege of hosting her in the United States for speaking tours on 3 occasions over the years. We've learned a lot from her on these issues. And every time I see her, she tells me she needs to retire from retirement. But for those of us who know her, we know that's probably never going to happen. And then for those of you who were able to attend the collaboration CSW virtual event last Thursday, entitled Cuba, Model for Implementing the Beijing Platform for Action, you were fortunate to view the wonderful documentary Maestra by the filmmaker Catherine Murphy. Norma is one of the featured guests on the film, and she describes her experience as a 15-year-old teacher, a brigadista, during the 1961 Cuban literacy campaign, which she says started her on the path to social development, activism, and leadership. So with that, Amy, could you please show the video?
Soy Norma Rita Guillarli Monta, psicóloga social, investigadora, afrofeminista, activista antirracista, que a raíz del haber sido participante de la alfabetización en Cuba, siento que en ese momento casi comenzó mi activismo social. Desde esa enseñanza, en ese lugar que me ha convertido en una eterna alfabetizadora, pues me he dedicado por todos mis años a trabajo en la comunidad con diferentes enfoques. Al ser especialista en la comunicación, me he podido vincular con grupos diversos, defendiendo temas tabú como son la discriminación racial, la discriminación sexual, y en medio de esa defensa se ha posibilitado que trabaje en espacios comunitarios diversos, por haber sido la presidenta de la sección de identidades, haber sido, no ser parte de la sección de identidades y diversidad que hoy llamamos seres de la Sociedad Cubana de Psicología. Y es desde ahí donde con activismo pude participar en el Centro Nacional de Prevención de VIH, apoyando con talleres y diferentes actividades, donde también hacía llegar la influencia de mis saberes con relación a la discriminación racial, con relación a la autoestima. Esto también posibilitó que lo pudiera hacer en el Centro Nacional de Educación Sexual, en su grupo de la Sociedad Multidisciplinaria de Estudio de la Sexualidad, donde pude apoyar también, siendo parte de las fundadoras del grupo de mujeres lesbianas, en ese momento del grupo de mujeres lesbianas en Cuba, que hoy ya es una red que disfruta de todas las ventajas que ha tenido el Código de la Familia, que le ha traído posibilidades de que sea concebido y reconocido el matrimonio, tanto el matrimonio por vía legal de casamiento como el matrimonio por una unión consexual, y que de ahí puedan producirse en el futuro posibilidades también de tener de tener legalidad que la apoye a tal punto que si vamos a hablar de alguna limitación que ha habido al respecto, está más bien relacionada con el hecho de que a veces son las personas que operan la ley que abogados o abogados que no son tan conocedores del tema, que hay que seguir trabajando en esa parte educativa para que no pongan trabas ni limitaciones, porque hemos tenido experiencias de casos que han ido y entonces le han dicho no, porque no está casado legal, no, y entonces también con la adopción e ir abriendo en ese sentido, como yo diría, las mentes con conocimiento y con educación. Son de las fundamentales limitaciones. He tenido posibilidades de hacer ese trabajo comunitario, sobre todo en esta etapa, porque paso a ser parte también de la directiva de la articulación afrofeminista cubana, y esa articulación ahora lo que ha hecho es articularse con todos los grupos diferentes que existen con relación a estos temas, y sobre todo en esta última etapa haciendo énfasis de incorporar a esa articulación también a los grupos de mujeres lesbianas y bisexuales para poder tener cada día más personas conocedoras que trabajemos en un mismo sentido y con la fuerza que eso necesita para poder lograr los cambios sociales que estamos cada día buscando. Ser mujeres que juntas ayudemos a las transformaciones.
Thank you, Norma. So Norma also asked me to mention how important the role of Cuba's national program against racism and racial discrimination and the Women's Advancement Program are in the goal to achieve full equality and acceptance of the LGBTQIA community in Cuba. So the next video is a short interview with a lesbian married couple from Havana, Argelia Hernandez and Ollantay Leon, who lead a community organization called Afro Diverso. So I had the opportunity to attend a drag show of extremely talented drag queens and Argelia as a drag king with the groups with whom I was traveling this year and last year as well. Afro Diverso is described as an Afro LGBTQIA2S initiative of civil society of a collaborative and participatory nature with an anti-racist and Afro-feminist approach from three fundamental premises, including art, health, and community. The objective is to empower and make visible Afro-LGBTQIA+ people. So I will briefly describe the premises. For art, it's focused on making visible, knowing, defending, and empowering Afro-LGBTQI plus people through art of transformation as an artistic transport for community social transformation. We make handicrafts from recyclable materials for education and commercial use. For health, we promote holistic sexual health. We carry out actions to prevent STIs and other diseases. We promote spaces for healing and self-care. And for community, we carry out affirmative actions in neighborhoods with different themes and proposals that facilitates the construction of beneficial and healthy public policies. We provide accompaniment, shelter, counseling, and guidance to people in situations of violence. All of this anonymously based on our experience as popular educators and activists. And I was fortunate to experience firsthand some of the wonderful work they do, including soup kitchen every Sunday and working with children in their community. So go ahead, Amy, and show the video.
Soy Argelia Hernández, coordinadora general de un proyecto que se llama Afrodiverso, proyecto itinerante, afro-LGBTI, antirracista y afrofeminista. Soy drag king, soy uno de los primeros drag king en la historia de Cuba, sobre todo negro, y estoy muy orgullosa de llevar esta manifestación artística a la comunidad como empoderamiento de la comunidad afro-LGTBI.
Soy Antay León Chivas, coordinadora de Afrodiverso, esposa de Ángeles Ray, y también estoy muy orgullosa del trabajo que hacemos con el proyecto. Hemos tenido con este proyecto un impacto muy fuerte en la comunidad a raíz de los derechos LGBTI y desde que salió los cambios del Código de las Familias, esto ha logrado que tengamos un mayor reconocimiento social y que los beneficios a la comunidad LGBTI sean mucho más y más efectivos para todos, es decir, que nos ayuden a solucionar problemas y que nos apoyen en todo lo que hace falta en la comunidad LGBTI.
En la organización estamos todo el tiempo abogando por la defensa de los derechos LGTBI, de los derechos humanos, de los derechos de las personas, y hacemos un grupo de acciones comunitarias afirmativas que permiten el desarrollo intelectual, el desarrollo académico, el desarrollo de emprendimiento de cada persona que fluctúa por el proyecto con ganas de crecer y con ganas de seguir hacia adelante y tener un futuro promisorio y positivo.
Sí. También con nuestro proyecto logramos que haya un mayor reconocimiento social y intentamos incentivar la igualdad de todas las personas, que no haya diferencias y que todo que sea con mucho amor y con mucho cariño desde la comunidad LGBTI hacia la comunidad en general, y que este trabajo que hacemos logre que seamos todos una familia.
Bueno, y así vamos desarrollando este proyecto en el día a día.
Thank you, Argelia and Ollanta, for all the work you do to break down any barriers in your community and achieve full acceptance of the LGBTQI plus folks in your community. So in closing, I just want to say that our friends and the many women I have met and talked to about the blockade and the Families Code, they've shown gracious hospitality, amazing creativity, innovation, and resiliency in spite of the blockade. And they're truly forward-thinking and committed to independence, social justice, and peace. We share their dream to end the blockade in order that they and other women can be free to live to their fullest potential. So we have a lot of work to do. So stay tuned, because at the end of our presentation, we'll let you know how you can join in our movement to fight to end the US blockade and take Cuba off the list of state-sponsored terrorists. Thank you. I'll turn it back over to Moon.
Thank you, Deb. Let me get my camera back on. Okay, here I am again. Okay, what amazing and inspiring work that they're doing in Cuba. Their commitment to the struggle. I'd like to thank also our sisters there. Thank you, Deb, for the work that you're doing. I'd also like to give the floor to Lenny. She's going to go back in and talk about more of the family code. She is sort of our in-house, expert on the family code. Whenever we have a question within ourselves and want explanation and want stuff, this is the woman that we go to. Gracias, Lenny. You're back on, sister.
Okay. I'm going to do an extremely abbreviated version of how we got here. So at the time of the triumph of the Cuban Revolution, which was in 1960, discrimination against Black people and against women were correctly identified as wrong and were prohibited. And this took place in spite of, traditional prejudices in Cuban society, but it didn't happen with discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. Both the traditional culture as well as the Catholic Church and maybe a little bit of influence from the Soviet Union, and created a sort of a machismo culture with a view of gay people as problems rather than people. But unlike some countries where we might be living, Cuba has consistently moved forward. By 1975, the Cuban Supreme Court was already saying that discrimination against people for being homosexual was illegal and that people discharged on that basis were entitled to reinstatement and compensation. By 93, Cuban people who were gay or trans were serving openly in the Cuban military. The 70s, Cuba created a constitution, which was a very advanced document for its time, but it had a view of the family as heteronormative, headed by a patriarchal male, etc. And so there was a point at which Cuba felt that they needed to create a new constitution, and they began to do that. The new constitution was finally formulated. It was passed by referendum in 1999, and then Cuba, the drafting process was huge. It involved public comment and revision. And, oh, golly, about 87%, a huge percentage of Cuban people voted yes. Those who had voted no were primarily driven by what they thought were permissions for same-sex marriage in the new constitution. And the original wording, which was very explicit, was changed after there was so much negative public comment, most of it driven by fundamentalist churches, if I can say. So they finally ended up with a version that said all people, all persons, have the right to establish a family. Marriage is a social and legal institution. It's one of the forms by which families can organize, founded in the free consent and equality of rights, obligations, and legal capacities of the two spouses. And not everybody in Cuba was happy about that. On the right, people thought it was too permissive of same-sex marriage and equity. And on the left, some people thought it was not explicit enough. But then Cuba went on to create a body of family law to conform to the new constitution. And it was remarkable. Código de las Familias, families code plural, a recognition of plurality. Families, not a single model. And it has over 400 articles. It not only protects the right of all people to form a family without discrimination and updates the legal definitions with inclusive models, it also addresses the right to a family life free from violence, centering values of affection, love, solidarity, and responsibility. Yeah, of course it recognizes same-sex marriage. Of course it makes, any discrimination against LGBTQ plus people, illegal. But it does some other very remarkable things. It gives agency to people previously considered sort of subjects, the elderly, children, people with disabilities. It focuses on horizontal rather than vertical relationships. Autonomy is recognized for people who did not previously necessarily have legal autonomy. It brought children conceived with techniques of assisted reproduction within the law. It gave rights to the relationship between grandparents and their grandchildren. It placed a value on household and caregiving work, a formal value. And one of the most controversial aspects, well, let me tell you some of the controversial aspects. Of course, same-sex marriage was a controversial aspect. The concept that parents would not have absolute ownership rights over their children, a legal concept called patria potestad in Spanish, which derives from a Latin legal term meaning the power of the father, was eliminated, not eliminating parental rights, but focusing on parental responsibility. This was very controversial. The concept that children would have increasing responsibility within the family based on their developmental stage, so a certain developmental autonomy. That was very controversial. Surrogate pregnancy without any hope of gain, without any, no gifts or money can change hands. It has to be entirely done for affection among people who are connected, in some way. That was very controversial. The idea that family life should be free of violence was actually controversial. But not only were these consultations with the Cuban people, there were like 79,000 meetings. There were meetings everywhere. And so these were also educational processes. And when it came to the vote, which was September 22nd, I think, or 25th of 2022, about 75% of eligible voters participated. And of these, 67% voted yes for the Families Code. And yeah, so all this also means about 33% of people voted no. So makes some things real obvious. It was a real vote. Not everybody gets it. And those who don't, they can talk all they want, but now it's law. They are not free to discriminate against LGBTQI plus people or anybody else they disapprove of. And the process is so remarkable. The decisive yes vote just points up that revolutionary Cuba, a country under siege by the US from its very first moments, country that the US is just trying to strangle by every possible means, has an overwhelming majority of people who still believe in justice and equality and human solidarity. They continue to make progress in the face of all these difficulties, and they do this based on open discussion, a democratic process that's sometimes painful and sometimes difficult, and they're reaching toward a better world. And it's exactly the power of the good example that I think that the US finds so frightening and is trying so hard to eliminate. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Lenny. Boy, it was good to hear all that information for me once again, and stuff. And we just got word that Yamila is in a formal session at the UN. The Cuban delegation comes here during the 2 weeks of the UNCSW, and their main mission here is to attend the meetings at the UN, give reports, listen to what's happening. So there is where Yamila is. We'll try and sit her next year on a panel. It may still happen again that she's in the UN, taking care of business in Cuba and about Cuba. And we're here at the same time, taking care of the business and the work that we're doing in solidarity with Cuba, learning from them and marching on. I forgot to announce my my pronouns. It's she and her, okay? We're now going to move on from the Families Code of this portion of the session, also into the two other speakers that we have. Amy, they are from Denver. I'm going to turn it over to Amy right now. Thanks, Amy.
Hey, Moon. My name is Amy Bryant, pronouns they, them. I am the vice chair for the Executive Council of the United Nations Association of the United States, and also the cultural director for the Gay Games Denver Bid Committee. If you don't know what Gay Games is, please message me after this. I'd love to tell you about it. But I am here to talk about the Cuba Code and how it relates to my work for local, national, and international LGBTQ activism that I do. So with the family code, I didn't know anything about it until the Lesbians and Allies Project graciously invited me to speak. I delved into it and began to realize the possibilities of this being replicated on local, national, and international levels to promote equity among LGBTQIA2 spirit plus persons and just marginalized, under-resourced persons in general. So one of the things that stands out to me about this code is that it really addresses intersectional issues and identities. And, you know, with family law, reproductive rights, domestic violence protections, children's rights, maternity and paternity rights, protections for persons who are older and persons with disabilities. I think that this provides a really comprehensive, holistic framework, and it intersects a lot with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So with this, the definition of marriage in this code is defined as a union between two people, which I really like. It doesn't really mention same-sex relationships. It does, but in the context of, you know, having same-sex relationships, it also kind of breaks down gender into binaries. So I liked the gender expansive language that they used. So this frees the social institution of marriage from compulsory heterosexuality is, I believe, one of the terms that they used in this code. And I found that to be very, I thought it was a great way to put it. And I'm gonna start using compulsory heterosexuality in my work going forward. So with this, in the United States, the Supreme Court of the United States, in particular, Clarence Thomas has mentioned his desire to repeal same-sex marriage in the United States. So one way to counter this is that we could replicate this for on the state level. You know, the state that I am in, Colorado, we're great for LGBTQI protections. So we actually codified same-sex marriage into our state constitution, which other states and states around the world could replicate. It's a really good, more localized strategy to protect marriage rights. And that way, if something on the federal level happens, folks on the state level will at least be covered. So one of the issues that was mentioned before was pushback by far-right neoconservatives and also religious interference, which we're seeing a lot more in the United States and around the world. Unfortunately, there's the rise of autocratic governments, fascist governments, organizations in civil society who also have ties to conservative religious groups like the Heritage Foundation, their Project 2025, and then CFAM. So what these organizations seek to do basically is establish a theocracy in the place of democracy. So we can see this trend happening all over the world. Unfortunately, and it also intersects with places that have been heavily colonized by the Western world. So with this law, with this code, it's worth mentioning that there was some pushback by religious organizations, but it was able to pass with public support, with participatory democracy. So with the rise of autocratic governments, fascism, far-right governments, it's really important to keep in mind that democracy is extremely important and it must be preserved. So we're seeing a lot of rise of talk about gender ideology, neonatalism, and then also one of the terms that is kind of bandied about is natural families. So with this Cuba code, it tackles that issue of only natural families having rights. Natural families is basically rhetoric. It's anti-IVF, alternative fertilization methods, anti-LGBTQ plus families, even going as far as, you know, having step parents. Anything outside of the heteronormative nuclear family, this rhetoric is on the rise. So with this code, it prohibits discrimination based on identity and sexual orientation, and then it protects family ties, and it's not based on blood relations. So we're seeing folks who have, you know, welcome children in by adoption being able to have protections, and it grants multi-parental rights. So in this way, this code recognizes the diversity of families as they exist in the real world. And so with this pushback that we're seeing and with this pushback that we saw with this code, it just really illustrates the power and the importance of the political will being there. And one of the most direct ways to influence political will is by changing public attitudes, namely stereotypes, negative attitudes, and perceptions towards LGBTQ folks. So with education, that was mentioned earlier as being very important to be able to sway opinions and also get the support needed to pass these laws, legislation, just as this. The power of storytelling is huge. So with CSW, I was able to connect with the UN ambassador to Malta. Malta has great LGBTQI protections. However, they also experienced some political pushback when they were trying to advance LGBTQ rights. So that's when the power of storytelling happened. So Malta is a fairly small country. So the storytelling became a bit more personalized, more personal. So there was this story that this ambassador said, one of the things that changed public attitudes the most was having a gay couple adopt a child with disabilities. And this child was considered unadoptable by a lot of folks, and this couple did not have any reservations at all. They adopted this child, gave them a loving, supportive family, and that really showed people what a family could look like and what a family should look like. Unconditional love, unconditional support, and radical acceptance. So when public attitudes change, then the political will follows through activism. One of the other issues that Malta had, and a lot of countries have nowadays with a variety of things that are anti-rights, is misinformation and disinformation, lies being spread online, unfortunately. So stochastic terrorism is on the rise. So with that, there's a lot of rhetoric that's anti-LGBTQ, a lot of misinformation, disinformation that needs to be countered. So one of the ways to do this is to start holding tech companies accountable for what's on their platforms. And one of the interesting things about the conversation with Malta is that they were working on financial penalties for these tech companies in the form of taxes. So with instances of spreading misinformation, disinformation, discrimination, hate speech online, there will be financial penalties for that, which is usually what gets companies and corporations' attention. And then there's also something that the UN is working on. It's called the United Nations Code of Conduct for Information Integrity on Digital Platforms. So I encourage you all to look that up. It's basically to promote facts, expose conspiracy theories and lies, while also safeguarding freedom of expression and information. And for my closing remarks, I really would love to start seeing more work with coalitions. So as I mentioned earlier, and as folks earlier in this webinar mentioned, there's a lot of intersectional issues when it comes to LGBTQ rights and the family code. So I would encourage folks to get creative with coalitions, because I think that we're working on the same or similar things, but we're too siloed off. And so our responses are lesser than they could be and a little bit fractured. So I would like to encourage folks to, dream big, start to find other organizations or movements that intersect with your agenda. They don't actually have to align specifically with that. But yeah, people power is the name of the game. And yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Amy. We are a little bit behind schedule. There's where my head was at just when I took that minute to breathe. One of the things that I want to mention, because I want to give credit to the CSW Rainbow Caucus, is that our friendship with Amy and the relationship that we have built is a direct result of the Rainbow Caucus at CSW, okay? Now we're going to move on to nuestra compañera Leah Borbano Mosquera, and she is associated with Mujer en Mujer, and she is here from Ecuador. Chévere, muchacha. Adelante.
Okay. Gracias. But I'm going to read my presentation in English. Greetings from Guayaquil, Ecuador. I am Leah Borbano, lesbian, feminist, educator, activist, human rights defender, founder and current director of Fundación Mujer y Mujer, a civil society organization that has been working to promote and defend human rights of women and LGBTIQ plus people in Ecuador for 22 years. For me, it is a real honor to be part of this important panel and to be present at CSW. So thank you, Moon, for the invitation. Just two little things before I start. One, English is not my native language, so I apologize in advance for any mispronounced words. And two, although it may not seem like it, I am quite ill, but I do my best to make my message clear. That's it. Let's get started. First, my premise is that Family Code of Cuba represents a progressive model in family diversity. So during my presentation, I will reflect on the full recognition of diverse families based on our own experience as an LBQ plus organization and the lessons learned from the Cuba model, emphasizing the challenges and opportunities that Ecuador would face in case it approaches this model. Having said this, the first thing I should mention is that in Ecuador, LGBTI rights have advanced and are warranted in the political constitution of the Republic, although some legal barriers persist, such as, excuse me, the PowerPoint, if it's possible to move on. Next, please. Next, next, and next, and next. Okay. As I said, our rights, our LGBTIQ plus rights in Ecuador have warranty in our constitution, although some legal barriers persist, such as lack of recognition of diverse families, the exclusion of diverse families in the childhood and adolescence code, the absence of a comprehensive law against discrimination based on sexual orientation, gender expression and identity and sexual characteristics, the existence of practices or misnamed therapies of sexual conversion, limitations in access to inclusive health care and education. And also, next please, and also certain social barriers such as discrimination and violence based on gender and sexual orientation, gender expressions, and gender identity, religious prejudice and conservatism, rejection in the workplace, underrepresentation in the political sphere and the media, disinformation, and resistance to change. Next, please. Next one, sorry. Faced with this panorama and taking the Cuban family code as a reference, from Mujer y Mujer, my organization, we have asked ourselves a question. What improvements should be implemented to promote more LGBTQ plus rights in Ecuador? And these are our conclusions. First, to legally recognize diverse families and multiparentally. Cuba's family code establishes a broad and flexible concept of family, defining it beyond the traditional nuclear structure. This allows for the legal recognition of families composed of same-sex couples, extended families, reconstituted families, and multi-parental models. In contrast, in Ecuador, although the Constitution protects the rights to family, the Code for Children and Adolescents follows a more traditionalist approach, limiting the notion of family to the mother-father-children relationship. This has implications for the recognition of same-parent families, which do not yet have legal backing in the country. In this sense, from A Mujer Mujer, we propose ensure that families formed by same-sex couples single-parent families, extended families, and other configurations are recognized the same rights as heteronormative families. Include multiparenting in the legal framework, allowing more than two people to be recognized as parents, ensuring rights of filiation, inheritance, and social security for sons and daughters in these families. 2, equal marriage and adoption, emphasizing and legalized adoption by same-sex couples. The Cuban Code is progressive in this regard, allowing for equal marriage and adoption by same-sex couples. In Ecuador, although the Constitutional Court legalized equal marriage in 2019, the Children's Code has not been updated to reflect these changes, meaning that same-sex couples are still unable to legally adopt. In this context, we propose modify adoption law to remove any barriers that prevent same-sex couples from adopting on equal terms with heterosexual couples. Implement sensitization and training campaigns for officials of adoption institutions, warranting processes free of discrimination and heteronormative biases, and to guarantee that children's rights take precedence over prejudices and conservative beliefs, ensuring their well-being in diverse families. I think there is a problem with the PowerPoint because I am moving 2 or 3 maybe. Okay, next one. Next one. Okay. Filiation and multiparenting. Explicitly include protection against discrimination in the Children's Code. So one of the most important advances in Cuba is the recognition of multi-parenting, that is the possibility for a child to legally have more than 2 parental figures. This is crucial for families in which there is a biological parent and a same-sex couples, allowing co-responsibility in parenting without excluding any of the caregivers. In Ecuador, the model is still binary, recognizing only 2 parental figures, mother and father. This generates problems in cases of homoparental families where one of the parents is not legally recognized. Therefore, we propose the following. You can see on the screen. Reform the Childhood and Adolescence Code to include explicit protection against discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identities in all areas: home, education, health, and child protection system. Establish a flexible reporting mechanism for LGBTIQ+ children and adolescents who face violence or discrimination in their families, educational centers, or other institutions. Train justice operators, teachers, and child protection services personnel in LGBTIQ+ rights, ensuring an effective response without revictimization. Next, please. Focus on parenting and education, specifically promoting sexual and family diversity education. The Cuban Code promotes an upbringing free of prejudice and recognizes the right of children to be educated in an environment of respect for diversity. In Ecuador, sexual and family diversity education is a highly politicized issue. Although the Constitutional Court has demanded the implementation of sexual and reproductive rights education, there is still resistance from conservative sectors, which affects the guarantee of inclusive education for LGBTIQ+ children. In this regard, we propose the following. You can see it. Include in the educational curriculum content of sexual diversity, gender identity, and diverse family models based on scientific evidence and human rights approaches. Implement training and awareness programs for teachers, administrative personnel, and families, promoting educational environment free of discrimination. And of course, ensure the educational materials reflect the reality of diverse families and the rise of LGBTQ plus people to foster respect and inclusion from childhood. Next, please. In this sense, as I mentioned, a different chance, although in Ecuador we have a constitution that guarantees rights, there are still some challenges that require priority attention. For example, resistance from conservative and religious sectors. In many countries, and Ecuador is not a section, conservative groups and some religious leaders have historically opposed advances in LGBTIQ plus rights, arguing that they undermine traditional values or the natural family. These sectors exert a strong influence on public opinion and politics, promoting discourses of disinformation and campaigns against inclusive reforms. They have promoted legislative and judicial blockades to prevent the expansion of rights, resorted to strategies such as media pressure and lobbying with political actors. Next, please. Another challenge is lack of political will to reform the childhood code. Excuse me. Although there has been advances in the recognition of LGBTIQ plus rights in Ecuador, many reforms remain still due to a lack of a state commitment. Political resistance is due in part to electoral calculation, as certain parties fear losing support from conservative sector if they push for progressive reform. There is no consensus within the National Assembly and no clear agenda for reforming the Children's Code, which delays the inclusion of explicit protection against discrimination. Next one, next please. Challenges in the implementation and application of new regulations, another challenge. Even when legislative advances are achieved, their application faces obstacles such as the lack of training of public officials, judges, and justice operators in LGBTQ plus rights. The existence of progressive norms does not guarantee their effective enforcement if there are no monitoring and sanction mechanisms for those who do not comply with them. It is necessary to ensure resources and institutionally will to implement public policies that support legal reforms, avoiding that they remain only on paper. Next one, please. The last chance we have is the need of strength, social and political mobilization. The struggle for equal rights requires an active civil society to maintain pressure on institutions and decision makers. Awareness campaigns and advocacy strategies are needed to counteract the disinformation promoted by opposing sectors. The articulation between LGBTI plus collective, human rights organizations, and allied political actors is key to push for reforms and ensure their effective implementation. Next, please. At this point, I would like to highlight the challenges and opportunities that we believe should be considered in order to achieve the full exercise of rights, both in Cuba and Ecuador. For Cuba, for example, we recommend ensure the effective implementation of the code and prevent obstacles to its application by conservative sectors, and ensure that legal protection translates into real cultural change within families and society. For Ecuador, we are recommending reform the childhood and adolescence code to reflect advances in LGBTIQ plus rights and guarantee adoption for same-sex couples, expand protection against discrimination, and ensure that LGBTIQ plus children has adequate protection frameworks. And finally, include family diversity in educational policies to promote respect and inclusion for childhood. The Cuban model demonstrates that it's possible to guarantee the recognition and legal protection of diverse families, offering a reference for other countries in the region. Although Ecuador faces resistance and obstacles, it also has opportunities to strengthen LGBTIQ+ rights through legal reforms and social mobilization. The articulation with networks such as Lesbians and Allies is fundamental to promote structural changes, promote the recognition of rights, and consolidate progress in the region. In this context, by way of conclusion, I would like to emphasize the following points. Cuba has made significant progress in terms of recognition of family diversity and LGBTIQ+ rights, while Ecuador still maintains a legal framework that excludes diverse families. So we have to work hard to make more advances. The recognition of equal marriage and adoption in Cuba represents a progressive model for Latin America, while in Ecuador, same-sex couples still face legal barriers to adoption and filiation. Protection against discrimination within the family is stronger in Cuba, while in Ecuador, there are general constitutional protections, but without a specific focus in the Children's Code. Multi-parenting in Cuba represents an innovative advance, allowing more than two people to be legally recognized as parents, something that has not yet been discussed in Ecuador. Let's build together more just, equitable, and inclusive societies where all families can be recognized and protected equally. Thank you very much.
Since I see my face on the screen, I am guessing that it is my honor and pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Yamila González Ferrer, Vice President of the Cuban Union of Jurists, and one of the amazing legal scholars and activists who did the work of putting together the wonderful Cuban Families Code. She was also, by the way, elected to CEDAW, and I don't have to explain to this group what that is, by the highest vote count ever recorded. Thank you, Dr. González Ferrer. It is an honor.
¿Ya?
Ya.
Bueno, buenas tardes y muchísimas gracias por la invitación a este encuentro.
Good afternoon and thank you for your invitation to this event.
Es para mí un placer compartir con ustedes nuestra experiencia sobre la elaboración e implementación del Código de las Familias.
It is my pleasure to be with you and to share our experience in drafting and implementing the Families Code.
Bueno, la compañera que habló antes que yo, la compañera de Ecuador, está muy bien informada, es decir, se ha estudiado a profundidad el código.
The lady that spoke before me, the lady from Ecuador, is very well informed. She showed that she had studied the code very well.
Y eso, bueno, pues me libera, ¿no? De algunos comentarios.
So I am free now to make some other comments on the code.
Pero bueno, sí me gustaría, en primer lugar, comentarles muy brevemente.
But I would like to say briefly.
Cómo fue el proceso de elaboración del código y cómo todos estos criterios vinculados a los derechos de las personas LGBTQIA+, pues están incluidos.
But I would like to explain you briefly how was the drafting process for the family code and how the rights of the LGBTQ+ community are included in the code.
Primero, decir que fue un proceso muy participativo.
First, to say that it was a very participatory process.
Este fue bueno, primero, antes que el código, ustedes saben que se discutió y se aprobó por referendo nuestra Constitución.
As you know that before the Families Code, the new Constitution was approved.
Y la Constitución fue aprobada en 2019.
This Constitution was adopted in 2019.
Pero en 2018 hubo todo un proceso de consulta popular.
But in 2018, there was a whole process of consultation.
donde quedó claro que los temas vinculados a las familias eran de un especial interés por parte de nuestro pueblo,
where it was clear that everything that had to do with the families was a specific interest for our people.
pero también nos dio la medida de que por mucho que pensábamos que habíamos avanzado en el país en estos temas,
But it also gave us the idea that despite we thought that we have moved forward a lot regarding these issues,
todavía teníamos una población pues con muchos estereotipos, prejuicios vinculados a estos asuntos.
we still had a population with a lot of prejudice regarding these issues.
Por eso es que se decide que a posteriori el Código de las Familias también fuera a consulta popular y a referendo.
That's why it was decided that the family code was put to consultation and then to a popular referendum.
En primer lugar, para que también todo este proceso tuviera una función educativa con la población.
In the first place, so that this whole process had an educational role with the population.
Que tuviera también, poder contar también con las opiniones y los criterios de la población con respecto al contenido del proyecto.
And to have the opinion and criteria of the population with respect to this project.
Y que quedara claro además que el Código de las Familias no se refería únicamente a derechos específicos de determinados grupos, sino que se refería a todos los derechos y a todas las garantías en el ámbito familiar de todas las familias.
But also to state that this Families Code was not only for the specific rights of any individual, for the rights of all the families.
Por lo tanto, el proyecto de Código de las Familias lo que venía era a desarrollar el artículo 80 de la Constitución que reconoce la diversidad familiar.
So this Families Code was going to develop Article 80 of the Constitution that recognizes family diversity.
Y que reconoce el derecho de toda persona a constituir una familia.
As well as the right of every person to set a family, to have a family.
Y a que ese derecho sea respetado y garantizado.
And that right is respected and guaranteed.
Por lo tanto, en el contenido del Código de las Familias,
so in the content of the Families Code,
se reconoce también en el artículo 4 relacionado con los derechos de las personas en el ámbito familiar.
It is also recognized in its Article 4 related to the rights of every person in the family.
El derecho a la vida familiar de todas las personas.
The right of every person to have a family life.
Con respeto también a su dignidad y a su proyecto de vida.
Respecting that person's dignity and project of life.
Por lo tanto, dentro del contenido del código,
so within the content of the code,
las personas, por razón de su identidad de género, de su orientación sexual,
people based on their gender orientation and sexual orientation,
tienen derecho a disfrutar y ejercer todas las figuras y las instituciones familiares.
Have the right to exercise all the figures and family institutions, all kind of family institutions.
Por eso no es que tengamos un artículo que reconozca, por ejemplo, el matrimonio igualitario.
That's why we don't have a single article that recognizes, for example, equal marriage.
Ni tampoco tenemos un artículo que expresamente diga que las personas, independientemente de su orientación sexual, pueden adoptar.
And that's why we don't have another article stating that one single kind of person have the right to adopt.
Porque desde el título de generalidades del código, estos derechos y garantías están reconocidos para todas las personas y todas las familias.
Because from the general name of the code, these rights are guaranteed for all people and for all families.
Quisimos que fuera desde el propio lenguaje que iba a utilizar el código, un código inclusivo.
We wanted to have, to use the same language of the code so that it would be inclusive.
De todas las personas y todas las familias.
For all people and all families.
Pero bueno, como decía ya anteriormente nuestra compañera de Ecuador,
But as said before by our comrade from Ecuador,
el matrimonio y las uniones de hecho están concebidas para todas las personas después de los 18 años.
marriage and de facto unions are recognized for all persons once they are 18 years of age.
Un elemento importante del código es que prohíbe el matrimonio de las personas menores de 18 años.
Something that we consider is very important in this code is that it forbids marriage of underage people. So you have to be 18 years of age to get married.
En el ámbito filiatorio de la filiación,
In the case of affiliations,
pues se reconoce no solo la filiación consanguínea, sino también la filiación adoptiva, la filiación por el uso de las técnicas.
we also have, in the case of affiliation, it doesn't only recognize blood affiliations, but also adoptive affiliation.
Y por las técnicas de reproducción asistida.
And those kind of affiliations that is related to assisted reproduction.
Y se reconoce la multiparentalidad.
And multiparental families is also recognized.
Que puede ser por una vía originaria o por una vía posterior.
That can be from the very beginning or it can be materialized afterwards.
Estamos hablando de el derecho que tiene una persona o una pareja.
We are talking about the right that every person or couple
que tenga, o sea, una pareja homoafectiva.
We are talking about same-sex couple.
A incorporar a esa relación filiatoria a una tercera persona que contribuya a la gestación.
The right that they have to incorporate to this couple another person conceived by gestation.
O a la concepción, si es un hombre.
Or in the case of male, conceptions.
Pero que esta persona, aún y cuando no es parte de esa relación, o sea, de pareja, sí pueda ser puedan incluirse en la relación parental.
And even though this person is not part of the couple, they may be included in the couple relationship.
Y también se reconoce esta afiliación socioafectiva.
And the socioaffective affiliation is also recognized.
Que son las personas que han cuidado por muchos años de niñas, niños o adolescentes.
And we are talking about people that have taken care of boys, girls, and adolescents for some time.
Y que aun cuando no los une un vínculo consanguíneo,
and even though they are not blood related,
los une el vínculo afectivo.
They are related by affective relations.
Por eso, entre otras cosas, que hemos llamado que este es el código de los afectos.
That's why we have said that this is also the code of affections.
Porque, aunque no, por supuesto, no negamos las relaciones consanguíneas, ni se le quita valor.
Because even though we don't deny blood relationship and they are not taking away any kind of value whatsoever.
No son las únicas que existen, ni necesariamente tienen que ser las más importantes, sino que son entre todas las relaciones, bueno, existen tanto las consanguíneas como las afectivas.
They are not the only relation that exists, and they are not the most important. So we recognize both blood relations and also affective relations.
Y lo que hace el código es crear los mecanismos.
And what the code does is to create the mechanisms.
Para que esto sea posible jurídicamente.
So that this is legally possible.
También hay una protección muy especial frente a la violencia de género.
There is also a very special protection against violence.
Frente a la violencia hacia las niñas, niños y adolescentes.
Against violence towards girls, adolescents, and women.
Frente a la violencia que puede existir contra las personas en situación de discapacidad o mayores.
Against handicapped people and also elders, the elders.
Que obviamente una de las razones por las que estas personas pueden ser discriminadas y violentadas justamente es por su orientación sexual o su identidad de género.
And of course, one of the reasons that these people can be discriminated against is because of their gender identity, gender orientation.
Dentro del ámbito de las relaciones parentales,
within the parental relationships,
se reconoce la posibilidad de figuras como la delegación de la responsabilidad parental,
Some figures are recognized, like the transfer of the parental responsibility
o la designación de guardia y cuidado a terceras personas,
or the transfer of guardianship and care to a third person.
que también se realiza en un ámbito de no discriminación.
That is also done in a non-discriminatory environment.
Y dentro del contenido de la responsabilidad parental,
And within the content of parental responsibility,
se reconoce el deber que tienen las madres y los padres
it is recognized the rights that the rights of women and girls
a brindarle a sus hijos e hijas una educación integral de la sexualidad.
to give their children or to provide their children with a comprehensive education of sexuality. Sex education, I'm sorry.
Esto lo voy a relacionar con algo muy importante que también comentaba la compañera de Ecuador.
I'm going to make a relation of this with something that was mentioned by the comrade from Ecuador.
Justicia.
¿Qué?
Dicen justicia.
Que es la de la educación integral de la sexualidad en nuestras escuelas.
And we are talking about the comprehensive education, sexualidad, sex education in our schools.
Este es un tema también muy debatido en la sociedad.
This is a very debated theme in the society, subject in the society.
A partir de la influencia de determinadas denominaciones religiosas conservadoras y que tienen una posición muy cerrada con este tema.
Based on the very influential influence of very conservative sectors, and that these sectors have a very conservative position on this subject.
Pero nuestro estado es un estado laico.
But our state is a lay state.
Que respeta y reconoce la diversidad religiosa.
That respects and recognizes religious diversity.
Pero no, es decir, no tiene ningún tipo de obligación de adscribirse a algún tipo de, o sea, algún pensamiento de este tipo.
So we don't have any kind of obligation to, let's say, ascribe with any kind of this thought of pensamiento, of thinking.
Nuestras escuelas son públicas.
Our schools are public.
Y en nuestras escuelas esta información
and in our schools, this information
se brinda de manera transversal.
Is streamlined, is provided all across the board.
En los contenidos de las diferentes asignaturas.
Through the content of every subject.
Hay un programa específico del Ministerio de Educación para la Educación Integral de la Sexualidad.
There is a specific program of the Ministry of Education for the comprehensive sex education of students.
Y que está muy vinculado al respeto a la diversidad.
That is very related to the respect for diversity.
Que se focaliza por ejemplo, en la prevención y atención del embarazo.
And it's focused on the prevention and attention of pregnancy.
El embarazo en la adolescencia.
Pregnancy during adolescence, in adolescence.
En donde, si bien Cuba tiene reconocido el derecho al aborto, a la interrupción voluntaria del embarazo.
And even though Cuba has recognized the right to abortion, to the termination of a pregnancy.
Desde 1965 es un derecho.
It is a right since 1965 in Cuba.
Pero tampoco desde el punto de vista educativo lo consideramos adecuado como un método anticonceptivo.
But from the educational viewpoint, we don't consider this method an
que no sea considerado un método anticonceptivo.
It's not a preceptive to avoid, let's say, being pregnant.
Porque obviamente tiene repercusiones en el cuerpo de las mujeres.
Because of course it has repercussions in a woman's body.
Por lo tanto, la educación va vinculada a reconocerlo como un derecho, pero que se utilice con responsabilidad.
So the education is towards recognizing this as a right, but a right that should be used with responsibility.
Y otro tema importante dentro de la educación integral de la sexualidad es el vinculado a todo lo relacionado con la explotación y trata de las personas, la explotación sexual.
And another thing that is related to the comprehensive sex education is the issue related to sex exploitation and trafficking.
Es, por lo tanto, un tema también de importancia en el país, es
And-
decir, que se ha debatido muchísimo en el país.
And this is a very important issue in the country, and it has been debated a lot in the country.
Esta mirada de los derechos sexuales y reproductivos,
This view of sex rights and reproductive rights,
que ha tenido es decir, su reflejo en la Constitución, en el Código de las Familias,
that has been reflected in the Constitution, in the Families Code,
también lo ha tenido en la Ley de Salud Pública aprobada en diciembre de 2023,
has also been reflected in the Public Health Law adopted in 2023.
y ahora mismo en que estamos discutiendo el Código de la Niñez, las adolescencias y las juventudes,
And right now that we're involved in discussing the Code of Childhood, Youth,
pues tiene también un capítulo dedicado al tema de los derechos sexuales y reproductivos de las niñas y adolescentes, de los niños, niñas y adolescentes.
there is also a chapter dedicated to the rights of children and adolescents.
En definitiva, lo que quiero dejar es que sí, efectivamente, tenemos un código muy avanzado con muchas herramientas para el ejercicio de los derechos.
So yes, I want to say that we have an advanced code with many tools to protect the rights,
donde se barren todas las discriminaciones,
where every discrimination has been swept away,
pero que estamos enfrascados en su implementación y aplicación,
but now we are involved in its implementation and application,
porque es muy importante también la capacitación, la formación
because training is also very important
de nuestros profesionales del derecho para que sepan aplicarlo a plenitud,
as well as education of all legal professionals so they may implement these provisions fully,
pero también la importancia de brindarle cultura jurídica a la población para que sepan ejercer estos derechos.
but it is also important to educate the population in such a way that they may exercise these rights.
Esto es algo importante en lo que estamos trabajando
This is something important we are working on
para garantizar la efectividad de lo que hemos aprobado en la norma jurídica.
to guarantee the effectiveness of what we have applied in our legal norms.
Voy a dejarlo aquí para que, o sea, si hay interés en alguna pregunta.
I'm going to leave it here in case there is any interest of making any questions.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Creo que tienes que poner mute.
Sí.
Para que llevamos. Wow.
Muchísimas gracias, Yamila, por esta breve explicación de una ley tan compleja y más la explicación de nuestra compañera Lea. Ambos hicieron un buen trabajo explicando y la justicia que le dieron a la ley y la explicación, la presentación fue maravillosa. Muchísimas gracias. So there's question and answers that we'll do specifically around the presentation of the Families Code. What we're also going to do is try and have another Q&A for about 5 or so minutes towards the end of the program. I'm going to give the floor back to whoever wants to ask questions, and Yamila también, okay? So tú puedes explicar y después tu compañero puede traducir, okay? Muchísimas gracias. Questions? No questions.
Luna, this is Shubhakram Sathi from India.
Beautiful, come on.
Yeah, I would really like to thank the Cuban team and you for organizing this. And I think you mentioned to me last year about this and I didn't understand. But I think what happens is, I think our governments, in India, we have made a lot of progress, but not in family code adoption and also same-sex marriage. But even though we may have this online sharing, I think if our government can visit Cuba and see it and experience it, I think even though we may not see drastic changes, I think it will really help. And I hope we can raise resources to do these exchange visits between Cuba and India and others. But I really want to thank you for the session. Thank you.
You're very welcome. You know, the U.S. women, we take women's delegations to Cuba, and we're going to do our first LGBT delegation come 2025. But what we try and do when we put a program together is have women come to Cuba so they can see for themselves the advancements of women in Cuba. You could get a hold of me. There is information on the U.S. Women-Cuba collaboration. If you want to get a hold of any of us. And so do that. It's great. Thank you very much for your feedback. I so appreciate it. Thank you for your comments and stuff. So anyone else for questions? Victoria, I see your hand up. Somebody's hand's up.
I think it's Yamila. I think your hand's up.
Yamila.
Sí, no, yo
Okay,
quería
sí, está bien.
agregar
Adelante.
Wanted to add
que nosotros en la Unión Nacional de Juristas de Cuba
that we at the National Union of Cuban Jurists
organizamos cursos sobre el sistema jurídico
throughout courses regarding the legal system,
o sea, dirigido al interés particular que tenga cada grupo que nos visita.
and those courses are tailor-made to every group that visits us.
Y también lo organizamos vinculado a otras instituciones o organizaciones como puede ser la Federación.
And we also throw courses for other organizations like the FMC, for example,
O el Centro Nacional de Educación Sexual.
or the National Sex Education Center.
Tenemos varias agencias en el país que se dedican a organizar a los grupos.
We have several agencies in the country that organize these groups
De cualquier parte del mundo.
from all over the world.
Y bueno, y coordinan con nuestra organización, con la Unión de Juristas, los contenidos de interés.
And they coordinate with our agency, with the Union of Cuban Jurists, the topics they want to be taught in these courses.
Por lo tanto, quedan todas y todos invitados
So you are all invited
a visitarnos y a intercambiar con nosotros,
to visit and exchange with us.
que será un placer tremendo recibirlos en nuestro país.
And it will be a real pleasure to receive you in our country. Welcome you in our country.
Gracias.
Thank you.
One of the things I would like to mention is where I met Leah. I met her in Cuba this May. I went to the Jornada de, transgender over at Cinesex. And so my compañera Teresa de Jesus introduced us. And so here's where I met her. And we took off, we were explaining about the Lesbian and Allies Project, the collaboration. And this is a result of our outreach. It's in Cuba and around Cuba. So it's possible that we can make another world possible with collaborating, we're getting on the same agenda and marching on. I think Cuba, everybody should go to Cuba, especially women and stuff. Muchísimas gracias. Yeah, Yamila and tu compañero.
We have another question in the chat.
Okay. Go ahead.
So Lenny asks, thanks for the impressive information about the rights of LGBTQ plus folks in Cuba, but we also hear about the effects of the blockade on everyone there. How are those communities particularly affected? Are there things that LGBTQ plus folks need in particular?
Sí, con respecto al bloqueo,
Concerning the blockade,
una de las áreas que mayor dificultades tienen producto de la falta de insumos y de materiales
one of the areas that is facing up most of these difficulties because of shortages
es precisamente la vinculada a la utilización de las técnicas de reproducción asistida,
is precisely that is related to assisted reproduction,
porque son recursos muy costosos
because these are very expensive resources,
que está afectado su adquisición por razón del bloqueo
and these resources are being hard to get because of the blockade,
y no solo del bloqueo, sino también de la incorporación de Cuba
but it's not also because of the blockade, but also because of the inclusion of Cuba
en la lista de supuestos países patrocinadores del terrorismo,
on the list of states allegedly sponsors of terrorism,
lo que crea una situación en el ámbito financiero muy delicada y de mucha vulnerabilidad para el país.
This has created a very vulnerable situation for the country.
Otras cuestiones que están vinculadas a esto y que están siendo afectadas, por ejemplo,
Some other things, issues that has been affected
son las relacionadas con las operaciones de las personas que quieren cambiar su sexo
is those related to the surgeries of people who want to change their sex
y que quieren hacerlo no ya jurídicamente, sino a través de su cambio físico.
and they would like to do so not only legally but also physically,
Porque esto también requiere de una gran cantidad de recursos que el país no tiene.
because this demands a lot of resources that the country doesn't have.
Entonces estamos en una situación que tenemos reconocimiento de estos derechos,
So we are in a situation where all these rights are recognized.
Está la voluntad política
There is also the political will
de facilitar estos procesos,
to facilitate these processes,
pero no tenemos las condiciones económicas ni financieras para poder hacerlo.
but we lack the financial and economic reality to implement this.
Un deseo también, una necesidad, por ejemplo, es la de tener un banco de semen en el país.
A necessity, a need, a wish is to have a semen bank in the country.
Esto no ha sido posible.
This has not been possible.
Y así les puedo decir en el ámbito de los derechos sexuales y reproductivos las cuestiones que materialmente nos están haciendo falta para poder desarrollar a plenitud estos derechos que hemos reconocido en el país.
So I could mention a lot of examples just to implement fully the rights, all these rights in the country.
Otras cuestiones importantes,
Another important topics, issues,
por ejemplo, son los retos que a nivel nacional tenemos todavía de transformaciones legislativas
other challenges that we have, that we face in the country regarding transformaciones legislativas, legislative transformation,
para garantizar todos los derechos de las personas por razón de su identidad de género.
to ensure all the rights of all people because of their gender identity.
Porque si bien en el ámbito familiar se han reconocido,
Because while they have been recognized in the family, I mean, from the family perspective,
pero todavía, por ejemplo, está pendiente de modificación el Código Civil, que es el que tiene la parte de derecho de personas,
but then the civil code is pending to be updated, and this code is related to the rights of people.
Tenemos en el cronograma legislativo también la ley de identidad,
The identity law is also pending,
que también que incluirá los temas de identidad de género.
that will include the gender identity topics.
Y en este momento se está modificando la ley del registro del Estado Civil,
And now we are amending the registry law of the civil code
que se va a aprobar en el mes de julio
that is going to be adopted in July this year.
y que sí ya va a incluir cuestiones relacionadas
And
con el cambio de sexo.
And that it is going to, and this one is going to include issues related to gender change or change of gender, sex change, I'm sorry,
Sin necesidad de una operación si la persona no lo desea.
without the need to undergo surgery if the person doesn't wish to do so.
Y también en esta ley estamos discutiendo el tema de reconocer este derecho para las personas menores de edad.
And we are also discussing regarding this law to recognize this right for minors, underage people.
Y que puedan cambiar entonces una vez en la minoría de edad y una vez en la mayoría de edad.
So they can change sex once while they are minors and once after they have reached 18 years of age.
Aquí les comento lo que estamos discutiendo en estos momentos previo a la aprobación de esta norma jurídica.
These are some comments of what we are discussing prior to the adoption of this law.
Gracias.
Thank you.
So at this point, this part of the program, we're going to move it over to the plan of action, what you can do. I'm going to turn it over to Deb again and stuff. Deb, you're on.
Okay, so quickly, we need the slide, please, Amy. So I have listed here, I won't go through every one of them. Lenny, can you put them in the chat so people can copy them? We have our collaboration, the U.S. Women in Cuba collaboration website, Facebook page, and YouTube channel. We have the Lesbian and Allies Project Facebook and email, and as well as Wills Cuban Bolivarian Alliance Committee website. Is there somebody who can put them in the, I don't think you can copy them off this slide. Is there somebody who's going to be putting them in the chat, please? Oops. Okay, next slide. We can go back to that. So just as quick as I can, these are some things that you can do to take action. You can help us organize an educational advocacy day in Washington, D.C. We're in the very, very beginning stages of planning this, and there'll be more information coming up on the webpage. So there we have the webpage on the chat. And like Moon said, traveling to Cuba with us or with any other organization. There are a lot of trips to Cuba. Go as soon as you can, because we don't know what's going to happen with changes in the current administration travel to Cuba. And lobby your Congress folks to remove Cuba off the list of state sponsors terrorism. As you know, President Obama took them off the list. Person who I can't mention put them back on the list. President Biden, unfortunately, the last couple of weeks before he was done with his presidency, took them off the list, and now they're back on the list. And as we know, Cuba sends medical teams around the world. It's insane to call them terrorists. And then educate your families and your friends and your communities by writing letters, editorials, media outlets, posts on your social media and your Facebook pages about the reality of Cuba and the impact of the blockade. And then also we're launching a new economic development project in Cuba through our lesbian sister group Phoenix in Cienfuegos. And because of the blockade, there's so many things that, like Dr. Yamila González said, people can't get a hold of. And so they'll be making reusable menstrual pads and hopefully expand their project. And also, Dr. González was talking about the lack of supplies they need to do assisted reproductive care. So one of the things that one of the sister groups in Santiago, Las Isabelas, was telling me that there is a clinic in Santiago ready to do assisted reproductive care, IVF, artificial insemination, etc. But again, they don't have the supplies they need. So that may be something that our collaboration can look into. If you're interested in supporting the new economic development plan that we're just beginning to plan, send an email to edp4women@outlook.com with your pledge and contact information, and we'll give you the details of how you can give support to the project. So if somebody could just put that link in the chat, I'll turn it back over to Moon.
So we will put the links in the chat that we can for right now. We'll also send out the links and do follow-up with the folks who registered for this webinar. As you can see, we have a lot of work to do. We have, and we're doing a lot of work. Get involved. Try and join the Lesbian and Allies Project. Even if you're from afar on the other side of the world, we can collaborate. Somehow we could get folks back in next year and see. The president also, as the presentation showed us, that there is much to do and that we can accomplish more by numbers when we get together. Have us on your webinars, get a hold of us, because we will come and talk about Cuba, help you along with a panel. I also want to thank everybody here that registered, that came to hear about life in Cuba with the embargo. Is hellacious. This country, it's amazing what they get accomplished under sanctions and in the embargo. Please continue to look for us on Facebook. Everybody did really awesome. I'd like to thank Amy, our tech person, Victoria, I'm going to call her out too. She's our computer person. Without her, I don't know where I would have been, or this webinar. We do really good work. Cuba, sí, bloqueo, no. Let's continue to do. Everybody, I also want to thank everybody on this webinar for the work that you all are doing in the world. Another world is possible as long as we keep marching ahead with making changes, good changes in the world. Be safe, keep doing what we're doing, and look for us next year at CSW. We will be there. Okay, thank you very much. Anybody else want to make any other comments?
Gracias por la solidaridad.
Thank you so much for the solidarity.
Yamila, todavía está aquí. Gracias a ustedes y la gente de Cuba. Que viva la revolución.
Viva.